We're going to talk about, really a lot of this is .NET information and knowledge, and it all applies to IronSpeed because IronSpeed generates .NET applications, as you guys know. So everything we learn here, maybe 75% of it is .NET, and all of it applies to how you use IronSpeed Designer. So my name is Jim Murphy. I'm the president of River City Software Development. We do custom programming, and we're one of the MVPs, a professional service provider for any needs you might have in IronSpeed Designer. Okay, so the basic etiquette, you could pick your audio mode, either telephone or speakers. Your speakers are fine. It ends up being a free call for you. Or telephone is pretty reliable as well. So if you have troubles hearing, maybe call in, and it might be a little bit better. You're free to ask questions at any time. Use the question and answer facility with GoToWebinar. Just pop your question in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold all questions until the very end because I want to get through the core material within the hour allotted because other people might have meetings and whatnot. And then I'll spend as much time as necessary answering questions thereafter. Okay, so on today's agenda, we're going to talk about the .NET code model, the page lifecycle, the difference between client-side and server-side. Where does this code run? Where is it happening? Master pages, into your applications, and MVC, Model View Controller. And then also how IronSpeed, what does IronSpeed give you as far as all that? And then question and answer. So for the .NET code model, so specifically in .NET, we're talking about ASP.NET, the web portion of .NET. So you can either have a single file page model or a multi-file page model. So the first portion we're going to talk about is a single file page model. That's where you have your layout and your code logic, your C# or VB code mixed between HTML and C# or whatever. It's mixed on the exact same page. So you can see as an example here, you've got your page declaration in the language of VB. You've got a script tag, which is HTML looking, and then you have a button click, which is VB code, followed by HTML, all on the same page. That's one way to do it, but it's really not recommended that you code that way. It's best if you put all of your server-related code in a code behind file and separate out the UI from the middle tier information. But that's just showing you one way you could do it. The best way to do it, which is the default way for .NET and for IronSpeed, is to use a code behind page model. This is the most common practice. This is really where you have a ASPX page, and that has all of your HTML, as well as tags and controls that refer to code in a completely separate file. So in this case, it would be the showOrders.aspx is full of HTML and a couple of controls, user controls and whatnot. And then your showOrders.aspx.vb, that's where all of the code logic, the programming, everything that runs on the server, all that executes out of that VB file. So it makes it a little easier to figure out what's happening in the browser on the client's machine versus what's happening on the server in that VB file. So this is called the code behind. You can either do it in Visual Basic as a language or C#. There's no performance difference when you build your application in .NET or IronSpeed Designer. The code behind and the ASPX page are compiled together, and there's no functional difference between having it all inline or having it separated out. The real difference is it's easier as a programmer to work with. In fact, it could allow a web designer to do HTML adjustments at the same time as a logic programmer to write some of the logic if you wanted. This is a best practice, and IronSpeed follows this. Okay. With the code behind, the way that's hooked up, it's not just the naming of the files that automatically hooks it up. There's specifically a tag that hooks these up. So this is in the ASPX. If you looked at the raw ASPX, you'll see a page declaration tag at the top. And one of the little properties there is code file equals, and then it lists a file name. So you can, honestly, you can change that to anything you want, and .NET will pick that up and work with it. So the application generated by IronSpeed Designer automatically hooks all that up for you, so you have nothing to worry about there. The code behind itself, when you open up the class that was being pointed to by the ASPX, you'll see it's busted out or broken into a partial class. This allows you to retain the core base built-in .NET and IronSpeed functionality and features, but give you a nice, easy way to subclass or make a derived class off of that, so you can override and make whatever adjustments to the logic you want at any time. IronSpeed is smart enough to allow you to subclass and make any code changes you want all over the place, and IronSpeed will not remove it or not delete it. It'll leave all those changes in place. Just don't change the code in the base classes, because that's what IronSpeed may rewrite depending on what you click in IronSpeed Designer. So the best practice is to use a code behind, which IronSpeed does. Also to derive a page from another common class. In this case, each of your specific application pages are derived from a IronSpeed base application page, which has a whole bunch of IronSpeed logic built in, security, and all kinds of stuff. And then that, in turn, is a subclass of a regular .NET page, where you get all of the .NET features all along with it. And you include all of your common page logic in these common classes, and IronSpeed does that. Okay, so now we'll talk about the page lifecycle. So the lifecycle of a page, right? A page needs to be created, it needs to be processed, or various pieces of code needs to be run, events need to be handled, and then the page is destroyed. So we're going to talk now for a handful of slides on this page model. It may be a little dry, maybe a little boring. Maybe I should come up with a joke and keep everybody awake. Or maybe you're already checking your email. I don't know. But this is actually very, very important. By understanding this section here, it's going to make all of your coding so much easier. The key to IronSpeed Designer is really understanding the various classes and the various methods and what they're supposed to accomplish. And if you know what they're supposed to accomplish and you know when they fire, which one fires first, which one fires last, then that's going to help you to figure out where do I write my custom code, specifically where do I write it and how do I write it, and your code ends up being a lot simpler than if you put the code in the wrong spot. You end up writing a whole lot more code and it's much more difficult. So this is good stuff. Okay, let me see. So somebody said they cannot hear me. I'm not sure if my audio is kicked out or cut back in. Okay, I'll assume that it's still going okay. Okay, so the page lifecycle is a sequence of steps that a page goes through, and it starts with initializing all of the controls or allocating memory for you, and also reading the data from the database, and then populating all of the UI controls and rendering all that into HTML, right? Because somewhere along the line, .NET has to translate all of this code and all of these controls and things like that. It has to translate that into HTML so that a browser understands it. Okay, so all of that happens while the page is at the server being built, and then all that HTML gets rendered out for the page to be displayed. So that's how to get the page created, loaded, and displayed. Once the user clicks on something or does something, changes a drop-down option, clicks a button or something like that, it goes back to the server, and the server needs to validate the data, save the data to the database, and then redirect to a different page. Like, for instance, adding an order, they'll add the first name, last name, city, state, zip, click the Save button. That page goes back to the server, everything gets created, all the data gets validated to make sure it's proper and good, and then it saves that into the database. So IronSpeed will write the SQL, put that into the database for you, and then your page needs to redirect back to your listing so you see your new order sitting there. That's one example. So .NET handles the loading of the page, the converting of the ASPX controls to HTML controls, as well as the rendering of these controls on the page. .NET does all that. At key points in the lifecycle, .NET raises events for you to hook in and add some code to change the default built-in behavior. So, for example, you've seen in your IronSpeed application that you can click on the Add button, fill out a form, click Save, and IronSpeed automatically does some basic validation, creates the SQL, and saves that into your SQL Server or Oracle or whatever, and redirects the user to a different page. If that functionality works for you, well then great. There's no coding that you need to do. IronSpeed did it all. If you want to adjust or modify how that processing is done to add additional validation, maybe you need to add your own validation that's not just a simple, phone number versus a zip code, but maybe you want to add your own code that will look up a value in another table, see if it's active, and if it has been shipped, then let it through, and if it has not been shipped, then throw an error. Right? There might be who knows what validation you need in your business rules. IronSpeed can't do that for you. And that's where you can override the validate routine, write in your own code to do your own validation, and either throw an error or let it go, and IronSpeed handles all the rest. So you need to know specifically which events you can handle and hook in and modify your own code to make everything work properly. Okay. So with the .NET event-based model, the whole concept is that you need to program based on these events. So part of that is you have to write an event handler, and then you need to initialize the page using these 3 main events, and then there might be additional events too. And then there's extra user actions. That might be an additional event. For example, a button click. So the 3 core events on every .NET application is going to be init, load, and pre-render. So init, and all these run on the server. So when the page is being created, init is going to allocate memory on the web server for the page and every single one of the controls needed to render everything. So that could be a little memory, that could be a lot of memory, but init will allocate the memory and create instances of all of the empty controls. Load is that has the job of getting the data from the database or data source and binding that to the user interface controls. Right? So a select statement gets the data, it pulls that into an object, and that object needs to be painted onto the screen so that the first name field ends up on the first name label on the screen. And then once all the data is loaded, it's pretty much ready to go, and then a pre-render event is triggered. Now pre-render has the job, these are all regular .NET events by the way, so every .NET application has these. Pre-render has the job of taking your .NET control, let's say it's a label or maybe it's a literal, and .NET figures out which kind of browser does the user have. If it's IE version 6, let's make that a span. If it's IE version 8, then let's render out a div. Or if it's Chrome, then let's just render out the value with no div or span. Right? So don't quote me on that. But .NET figures out how it needs to render for the various browsers so that we as programmers don't have to worry about that whatsoever. We just say, hey, it's a label, here's the value that's supposed to be on it, and .NET says, no problem, I'll figure out how to turn that into raw HTML and send that to the browser so that the browser will render it correctly. It's kind of amazing that it works, huh? Okay, good. Let me see. Okay, so this is an interesting section here. Let me just get my my mouse so we can see the pointer. Okay, so we have 2 different colors. We have yellow and yellow. Well, I don't know, maybe orange? I don't know. It looks like yellow and yellow to me. So the first yellow is a page class method, and so that happens at the page level. And the other yellow, the yellower yellow, is that yellower? Is the row or record control class. And you'll see row or record control kind of used intermixed, interchangeably. And the reason is because if you're looking at a table that shows 10 rows, each of those rows is a record control. You know, IronSpeed uses a .NET repeater in order to repeat a record control, which is an IronSpeed class, to render out the value. So I'll use row and record control interchangeably. Technically, they are record controls. It's a listing of record controls. Okay, so when a page is created for the very first time, let's say your add orders page or show orders page or something like that. Let's say a show orders page. The page's init is going to allocate the memory on the page. And since there are controls sitting on the page will delegate to each of the controls until the control, in this case the record control, hey, add orders record control or show orders record control, you also need to init. And that record control, which is the user control, will initialize each of its labels, text boxes, or whatever it needs to, and then control returns back to the page. So by the time init is done, all memory has been allocated for all of the page and all of the controls on the page. Then the page will call it the page's load routine. And part of load handles authorize, which if you want to manipulate IronSpeed security to make it behave differently, you can do that. You can override authorize if you'd like and change the security or bypass the security altogether. Once authorize successfully validates that this user is allowed to be on a certain page, this is all page level stuff, then the page then calls the load data. Remember, load data has the job of getting the data out of the database and then plastering it on the screen. Or I shouldn't use terms like that internationally. Putting that data on the screen. So part of the load data, this is all built into IronSpeed, is going to start your transaction at the page level, and then it's going to delegate to the control, to the record control, to say, hey, as a page, I don't really have any data. All I have is this record control sitting on the page. So the page tells the record control, you need to load your data, and the record control will say, okay, great, I'm a show orders page, so that means I need to make a select statement for the orders table. Before I do that, I need to make a where clause, and the where clause might take values from the URL, might take parameters from the form, might take parameters from the user. Maybe the user filtered some things using some of the filters, or maybe you as a programmer programmed in that only show records where active equals true. So the where clause is created from a handful of different sources, and if you wanted to change that, you can easily override create where clause and handle your own logic to use what's already built in and then add some additional criteria that you want. Very easy to do right here. Once that where clause is done, load data will then go and get the record, passing in that completed where clause, and now the control has a record. After that, the control will bind that record. That's basically the art of taking the record's first name and putting it on the first name label, and the last name to the last name label, and so forth. Once that's done, there might be a drop-down. Let's say there's a state or country drop-down list, and IronSpeed will run this separate routine for every single drop-down list, the populate, let's say, country drop-down list. If you wanted to manipulate that and only show countries that are in the European Union or whatever, you can do that. All you have to do is override that method and add the code to figure out which of those countries qualify, and then the resulting record set will bind correctly. And when that's all done, IronSpeed then ends the transaction. Once that's done, control is over at the page level with load, and then the page's pre-render runs. And of course, pre-render delegates to the control, which delegates to another control, and so forth. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how the information is passed back and forth, how control is moved from place to place, and how granular IronSpeed allows you to override the code. If you wanted to, you could override not the create where clause like you should if you wanted to change the filtering criteria in code. If you wanted to, you could do that at the load level. But if you overrode load and tried to adjust the where clause directly from load, then you would have all this other code to bypass or somehow find a way to deal with, it's much more difficult. It ends up being a lot more work. So really you'd want to identify what is the most granular place, the smallest place that I need to pinpoint my code change and override only that routine. That's going to keep your code smaller, your modifications smaller, your code to maintain much more simple, and it's going to work a whole lot better and carve hours off of debugging. Okay, good. Okay, so after displaying a page, once that pre-render runs and the page goes over the network to the customer's browser, to the client's browser, the server forgets about the page. It deallocates all that memory and forgets about it entirely. So it has no idea what just happened. And all of the page details goes to the client's browser. Any state-related information, so the web is stateless, right? It's not a client-server application where you have a state to maintain, whether so it's stateless. So what happens is the state or the condition of the page itself is sent in the view state to the client, and it's forgotten about by the server. And then once the user clicks a button or performs some action, that view state is sent back to the server so that the server can reinitialize, reload, but it'll load based off of the view state rather than pulling from the database, and so forth. So the view state is very important. And we're going to talk in much more detail about Postback and also view state shortly. Well, actually, right now. Okay, so Postback. So a Postback, when a user performs a Postback, what they basically do is an event is raised. Let's say they're looking at an edit order page. If they change the country, you can choose whether you want to have that action post back to the server for additional processing or not. So if you do, then you need to set that control up to post back if IronSpeed is not already posting it back. And that's going to send the view state and everything back to the server. And then the server will be able to basically recreate the page, repopulate the UI, except this time from the view state rather than the database, and then perform the event handler that is desired in order to perform whatever processing is needed. In order to do this, you must tell your event handler that it needs to post back so that the client will know to send the page back to the server. So user actions can cause the post back. When the post back occurs, now this is on the server, when the post back occurs, there are 4 main events that are going to trigger from this post back. It's going to do the initialize and reallocate all the memory all over again for that page. It's going to do a load, except this time it's going to pull the data usually from view state during the post back, but you can have it pulled from the database if you want it. And then it's going to run your event handler, like your button click event or your drop-down change value event. All of that happens after load and before pre-render. It's important to know that. So I'll reiterate that. Your button click event, your drop-down change event, basically any other event is going to fire after load is completed and before pre-render. So just keep in mind what load does. We already saw that. When your event handler fires, you'll already now know what already took place, what was already processed. And then, of course, pre-render is going to send all that HTML. It's going to convert the controls, .NET controls, back into HTML and send it back to the browser. Okay, so this is largely the same kind of concept that we just saw. You've got the page controls, which are in yellow, and the record control methods that are, well, also in yellow. And you can see the page is lit, and it really looks largely the same, but you can see that after load was completed, see now there was a save button click. So the save button click calls the save button click base, and that event is going to do all of the built-in normal IronSpeed handling. And then once all of that is done, a transaction is started, and then as part of saving the data. And again, you can override the Save button click and handle this yourself if you want. But by default, IronSpeed is going to perform a save data. Inside the save data, it's going to load the data, validate the data, scrape the screen in order to get the latest values from the screen, and then save that record. For extra credit, if you're wondering, why does it load the data again? It already has the data. You're trying to save, not load. Why is it loading? Anyone raise your hand, I'll throw you a t-shirt. Oh wait, I can't do that over the phone. I'll upload a t-shirt. Okay, well I'll just tell you then. The reason for that is because to better deal with concurrency. So if user 1 loads up a certain order to edit it, and they sit there editing for a minute, and user 2 opens up the same order and performs an edit and saves it, they're much faster. They should get a raise. So they save it super fast in 10 seconds. Then when the first user goes to click Save, IronSpeed will automatically check to make sure that the record has not been tampered with since it loaded it. And if the data has been tampered with or adjusted, instead of overwriting and losing all of the other user's changes, IronSpeed will give you a warning and let your user know that, hey, the record changed. Saving could lose some data. Are you sure you want to do this? Okay, so during Postback, it's valuable to check the isPostback flag to see whether you're currently processing or your code is running at the time of an initial page load or at the time of a postback. It's very important for you to code to understanding if the code should only run when the page is being created the first time or if it should run every time. And you can do that easily in code by saying if not isPostback, and you can kind of see the example there. State management for that view state. So you have the view state, this is a standard feature of .NET, and by default the state information is maintained in HTML and sent back and forth between the server and the browser. It's encoded, it's not encrypted. That's important to know, so don't hide something secret in view state, like a password or account number or something like that. You got to understand that it's very trivial or easy in order to decrypt and figure out what's being saved in the view state. And all of that is sent to the client so that they have the current condition of that page. Hang on 1 second, let me get some water. Okay, so this view state is kind of big. If you ever view the source on a page, on a .NET created page, you'll see a fairly big view state. And there are ways to work around that. We'll talk about that here very shortly. But just know that there is a view state, and that information gets passed over the network between the server and the client. When the client performs an action, the view state is sent back to the server. The server uses it, works with it, adjusts the view state as necessary, and sends it back to. So that's how a web experience appears to be stateful when in reality it is really stateless. Okay, you could, if you want, save the view state into the session or into cache or into a file or in the database rather than having it on the page and going back and forth over the network. So you could do that, but additional work is required. And also the session or cache could get timed out and you can lose the state, and that could cause some strange side effects or problems. And if you save it to the database or a file, you need to clean it up regularly. So for those advanced users, you can absolutely do that. There's an option in IronSpeed to switch where the state is going to be. I think it's under the Tools menu. But for most users, you should probably not plan on doing that unless you fully understand the goods and the bads of each of these options. Okay, so to review the best practices for the life cycle, the page life cycle, most of the work should be done by handling the load event. Well, we see that most of the work on the page is done by handling the load event. A init is only used for initializing event handlers and allocating memory. Pre-render is only used to handle, or pre-render should only be used for handling dependent drop-downs and things like that, not the bulk of your overriding or logic. And security should be checked at load. Specifically inside load, there's a routine called authorize. You can handle it there. And then to use isPostback extensively to make sure that you're not double loading data. The last thing you want to do is load the data up so that when the user changes the drop-down item, you end up loading the data up from the database all over again. That'll make your database and application performance slow, and you'll see extra hits to your database, and you don't want that. Use the page to save the view state as a best practice. There are other more advanced ways to handle that, but they have side effects and occasional problems, so it's best to leave it as page. And it's better to initialize event handlers on the load event if you have any tab containers with panels. So there's a little bit of an adjustment there, since tab panels are handled a little bit differently than normal panels. Okay. Best practices. Okay, so to continue, where to store your application information in the view state, session, cookie, or database. If you save it in the view state is unique for a given page, but it doesn't persist across the whole application, so you need to store it temporarily as a variable on the page. If you need to store a temporary variable on the page, you can put it in the view state. And again, the view state usually goes back and forth with the page. You can save your values in the session, but the session is unique per browser section and doesn't persist between the client machine or the server. So, so we do use that for the logged in user ID. And you can also save values in the cookie. And the cookies are always part of the browser, just stored on the client's machine. And you can fetch the cookie, and the cookie gets sent back and forth, just like the view state. A different area, but it's the same concept as the going back and forth as the view state as well. Okay. Also, somebody mentioned that my audio stopped for a sec. Did my audio stop for a sec, or has it been okay the whole time? Okay. So while you answer that, I'll go on to client-side versus server-side. Okay. So client-side code executes at the client's browser level. So if you have validation or JavaScript, okay, so people are reporting that the audio has been fine, it's been okay the whole time. So, so I don't think it's on my side, the breakup, but who knows? You never know. Okay, so on the client side, if you put code on the client side, then that would be something like a JavaScript or something like that, so that instead of the page going all the way back to the server to get processed, your logic could get processed at the client side. So therefore, it executes much faster because it doesn't have to make a trip back and forth to the server. This allows you to do maybe some simple things, change the appearance of controls, make them visible or not, enabled or not. You could do some client-side validation, but the note to that is to please always do additional validation on the server side, because remember, the client side is not secure. Anyone could take your page and manipulate it and bypass that validation and send you data back that might be malformed and could be a security risk. Now, fortunately, you don't have to worry about the security risks in IronSpeed Designer because they built in cleansing and making sure that the SQL injection and other security risks are sanitized or cleaned out before the page is processed. But if you write your own code on the server side, then you might write code that could be at risk. So in that case, you're going to want to make sure that you double validate on the client side as well as on the server side. On the client side, you can also register pop-up warnings, maybe execute some additional scripts. Let me see. You need to load a script on a page load or in a postback so that you can have it executed later at the client side. Okay, so server side. So once the client or the JavaScript gets processed, that page gets sent back to the server. The server basically executes on the server all the logic, and then the results of that processing get pushed back to the browser. So it goes back and forth between the client system and the browser. The server has some additional benefits. So on the client, the benefit is it's fast, and it avoids the hit to the server. The server benefit is pretty much everything else. It's a little slower, but it gives you full access to the data access layer code, the business layer code. You can do database hits and additional complicated processing. It's more secure. Everything is strongly typed on the server. With JavaScript, you can make a spelling error and have no idea. It's hard to debug, harder to debug. But on the server side, it's easier to debug. And all of the server-side code runs after the client-side code is finished. Okay, so server-side versus client-side. You have the page load, which is the initial page hit, loads all the content for the page the first time, and executes all the scripts on the page, raises whatever events are there, right? The init, the load, pre-render, maybe even some additional events. And optionally, this is where you can say, hey, I want a certain button to post back, and also I want, when it does post back, call this server-side routine. And then out the page goes to the browser. And then if the user clicks a button, changes a drop-down, something like that, then that information is going to be sent from the browser. It's going to post back to the server. And that's where the server is going to load all that information up on the ASPX, going to allocate memory and load up the state from the view state, usually on the page. It's going to execute all those scripts that were hard-coded in, plus any scripts that you put in the load page to run. And it also raises events and executes server-side code. I need some jokes in here to make this a little more lively, don't I? Okay, I'll think some up. Okay, using an Ajax update panel. So Ajax is pretty cool. Ajax gives the users the feeling that the page is not going all the way back to the server to be processed. So basically, the best use of Ajax is when you only need to update part of a screen, then instead of the whole entire screen, then the Ajax code will grab a portion of the page, send that back to the server, do a portion of the processing on the server, and render out a new portion of the HTML, and Ajax will dynamically replace part of the HTML on the page. So that gives the experience that, oh, I clicked something and magically something else just changed next to it. How did that happen? It's pretty cool. The good news is IronSpeed uses Ajax. It's already built in for you automatically, so you get a flicker-free experience. Of course, when you go from one page to another, of course, you're going to see a flicker. It's a whole new page to load. But when you're working on a specific page, then IronSpeed will automatically do server calls in the background for you. Okay, so when you're performing some kind of an Ajax action and the user needs to wait for the trip to the server and back, then Ajax can show a progress, a little update progress control. You know, the little spinny thing, you've seen it before, the spinny doodad. And that's already built in. You can create your own. There's a default one already built in for you, and you can use an animated GIF to make it look like it's rotating around. Really, it's just sitting there the whole time, waiting. Okay, so the best practices for Ajax is it's best to use a single update panel. You can use more update panels, but it's more complex. It's going to take more debugging time, and it's funny, but you can use one. Using multiples can handle special handling. A single update panel updates only when the control is changed, and IronSpeed Designer generates a single update panel on each page. Okay, master pages. How am I doing on timing? Oh, I'm doing just right. And again, we'll get through the material in the hour, and then we'll have additional questions thereafter. Okay, so master pages. So .NET has a concept called master pages that makes it much easier to separate the page design from and its organization from each of the pieces that specifically vary or change. This gives you a consistent layout. It centralizes your common functionality, makes it much easier to maintain, And their master pages are typically used for the styles. The style sheet is all hooked in with the master page, as well as headers, menus, footers, and things like that. Okay, so a master page on this specific page, which is some kind of a sales representative table listing page with 1, 2, 3, 4 rows or record controls. You're basically going to have the master page. So the master page has several different kinds of regions on it. One is a user control for the header, and the header is a single shared header that is referred to almost like an include in each of the pages. The next region is the menu. The next region is just a placeholder tag for where the specific page content is going to reside, and that's everything basically in yellow here. And then the master page refers to a user control for the footer. And again, that footer is a single shared footer that all the pages refer to, and it gets included into the app. So that's what you'll see when you open up the master page. You can arrange and organize the layout just the way you want. You can have a menu on the top as well as add a menu on the side and just move the page content over a cell. So you can have a blast with the master page and really make your app look strikingly different. One master page can be nested inside another master page, for example, a SharePoint app. So you still see your normal header, menu, page content, and footer, but all of that is wrapped into the SharePoint framework. So yeah, that's 2 master pages. In order to hook those master pages up or to provide the page content, the master page looks just like what you see right here. In fact, that's pretty much an exact master page from top to bottom. And you can see there is a some page settings, some things in the body, and then you have this content area right here. So this content placeholder gets replaced. So this .NET tag gets swapped out with each specific IronSpeed page. So when you're looking at your IronSpeed pages, they're not really full pages. They're partial pages. They don't have the begin and end HTML tag and whatnot, or body tag. Instead, they just fit right in here, and all that partial HTML gets rendered right in the middle, and all that gets shipped to the browser. Okay, the best practices for master pages: create multiple master pages if you have different needs. Sometimes you might not want to show the menu. Other times you do. So go ahead and make 2 master pages, and don't change tons and tons of pages. Just change and make a different master page or 2, and then hook those pages up to the new master. It's much easier. You can nest master pages if you need. Include all your CSS, JavaScript, and whatnot in your master page rather than in all of your other specific pages. You want to keep that content, what each IronSpeed page renders. When you're in IronSpeed and you click from page to page, you want to keep that focus just on the actual data, not on the whole environment, I guess you can say. Fortunately, IronSpeed does that for you, though. Okay. Let me get a little bit more water. Okay, an interior application. Okay, so the concept behind an interior application, in means kind of an uncountable tier. It's not 2-tier like a client-server app. It's not necessarily 3-tier. It could be 3-tier, 4-tier, 5-tier, or something like that. The concept in making an in-tier application is finding a way to divide up your code, or divide up the functions or purpose of each piece of code, so that each layer addresses its own needs. So, for example, at the very top of the stack, you have the layout or ASPX pages. That's where you're going to have your HTML, the look and feel. This is kind of the core of what the end user is going to see. A little bit lower than that, on a layer below that, you're going to have UI code. So it's not just look and feel, it's code, but the code relates to the UI. So we're talking making things visible or invisible, or things, maybe you want to change the color to red, depending on if it's a problem or whatever. And you do that in code behind files. So I guess you can say you have a middle tier or a UI tier of all your code behind files. And then those code behind files should call into business layer code, right? So the business layer code would be kind of shared code that performs common actions. And then that business layer code may or may not refer to data access layer code, which that data access layer code knows how to call stored procedures or knows how to generate T-SQL or PL-SQL or whatever, and then execute the stored procs. And then your stored procedures ends up being a different tier because that's on a database that might even probably a completely different server. So you have some of this code all on the same server, your web server, and some of that code on a database server, or you can even split it apart and have 3 servers involved or what have you. So that's the design of an in-tier application. As a little graphical example, for each table, IronSpeed will generate a bunch of pages and a bunch of code behind logic areas where all kinds of processing happens for those pages. And then that logic code interacts with your custom code where you're able to kind of subclass the built-in code behind in order to add your own customizable code and then refer to the database and whatnot. So for the best practices, you want to make changes in the layout. Any change that you make in the layout should not impact the code behind too much. And changes in the database schema shouldn't have a major rewrite effect on your whole on the screen. I mean, obviously, if you add a field in the database and you want it on the screen, sure, you have to make a change, but you shouldn't have to rewrite or rebuild everything. And there might be certain schema changes, for example, adding a default or something like that on the SQL Server that shouldn't impact the UI at all. The data access layer should use strongly typed objects. And paging, paging meaning next page, last page. Those kind of features should be done in the database, not in memory. Unfortunately, the built-in .NET Grid View, List View, and whatnot do paging in memory. What I mean by that is if you fetch, so if you want to show 10 rows, by default in .NET, you would build a select statement that ends up selecting all million rows out of your database, pulling those out of the database server off the disk, reading that into memory on the web server, and then pushing all of that over a grid view, a regular .NET grid view, and it takes forever in order to load all of that. And on a grid view, if you say, only show me 10, the normal .NET way is to still load all million and move all million over to the web server. It just throws away all of them except the 10 that you want to show. And when they click page number 2, it loads it all up again. It's terrible for performance and system resources. A best practice is that paging should be done in the database. If you need the first 10 records, only those 10 should be read off the disk on the SQL Server. Only those 10 should be moved over the network, and only those 10 should be displayed on the page. And then when the user clicks on page 2, it should go back and only read the next 10, and so forth. That keeps each database hit bite-sized. That reduces the amount of memory in your web server and makes your application far more scalable, both your SQL Server and your web server, far more scalable. And fortunately, IronSpeed does do that more complicated paging at the database level rather than loading it all up. So that's good. And concurrency handling is important in highly asynchronous applications. Okay, so best practices for MVC or Model View Controller. The model handles general behavior. The view is kind of what you see, or the UI, and the controller kind of is the policeman, the traffic cop, in order to control everything. So in a web application, the model is all the business and data layer code. The view is the ASPX or ASCX code, JavaScript, things like that. And the controller is the code behind and any common classes that you might have written as well. Okay, so IronSpeed Designer implements the best practices for both the .NET code model, the page lifecycle, Ajax, master pages, and MVC. It lets you focus on just the business logic, so you You don't have to worry about all the details of that complicated paging that I was talking about and tons of other details. IronSpeed just makes it all disappear. You don't have to worry about it knowing you're using best practices using IronSpeed. Using the .NET code model knowledge is important if you want to add code to extend your application. So hopefully what we learned about today shows you how well organized. IronSpeed rarely talks about their code model and talks about how easy it is to extend it from a coding perspective. They usually say you don't even need to code. You can use some other things, formulas and whatnot. But the reality is they spent a lot of time organizing the code in such a way that makes it very easy to extend if you're familiar with inheritance and object-oriented programming. Okay, so layout customizations use kind of a spreadsheet copy-paste sort of a feel so that you don't have to know the HTML. Even if you do know the HTML, it's faster to copy and paste in what looks like a spreadsheet. You can use toolboxes to drag and drop, and you can also do Excel-like formulas as well as code customizations. That makes creating your app much, much faster. The data access layer customizations you can do in the database property sheet, also with formulas on the data access layer. All this is to help you reduce the amount of code you have to write. But if you need to write code, you're welcome to. You can also write Excel-like formulas in the, hey, is that BMW, the car manufacturer? Bavarian? No, that stands for Batchmeister Wizard. That's if you want to use a common change throughout your whole application, you can find the Batchmeister Wizard and perform that. You can apply formulas to that. And you also have business logic. You can use a query wizard to modify the query and whatnot. So we talked about changing the where clause in code. You can also use a few clicks to change the where clause as well. But for more advanced filtering, you may have to use code to extend that even more. To give you an example of the page layout customization, this spreadsheet shows you the fields. You don't have to worry about the HTML. You can just drag and drop and manipulate it right here with the right-click menu. And IronSpeed will translate all of this into TDs, TRs, divs, and whatnot. So you don't have to really understand all the HTML for that. There are toolboxes where you can drag and drop controls onto the page, and IronSpeed knows how to data bind them and ready to go. It's great. The formula language is very Excel-like. You know, the equal sign is AVG or SUM, sum and average and whatnot. So if you use formulas, there's no need to use code for much of it. Maybe 75–80% of the code could be done in formulas. I prefer professionally to use code more than formulas, but many people prefer formulas, so you have your choice. And if you want to use formulas, you just need to know the Excel-like formulas rather than know how to code. So really, what is your time worth, and what is the return on investment? With IronSpeed Designer, you don't have to know how to do the details of your ASPX.NET coding, and you also don't have to know how to do your C# or Visual Basic coding. But if you want that level of control, you got it. It's no problem. Okay, well, that kind of wraps that up. Thank you for attending the class. We finished about 4 minutes early, or 5 minutes early. So now we'll open this up to questions. I've got a ton of questions here. If you have additional questions, by all means, throw them in the question box now. And I've got a fairly massive list of questions because there's a lot of people on this call, hundreds in fact. So let me just go ahead and start chewing through the list here. Let me see. Where are my glasses? Don't have my glasses. I can't read anything. Okay, I can hear you well. Let me get rid of all the I can hear yous. Okay, so Wayne says, can I add new using or import statements to the top of a code behind, which is outside of the region section 1? Place your customizations here. That's a good point. There are a few things you can do with that. If you right-click on the spreadsheet look and feel, if you right-click on that, you'll see at the very bottom there's a section for page directives. Let me load that up. I think I have IronSpeed Designer sitting right here. Let me make a new app real quick. But yeah, there's something called page directives, Wayne, and that's where you can add things to the top, what they call the prologue, or the bottom of the page as well, which is outside of those regions you mentioned. So this is my current system. Okay, so before I show that, let me just go ahead and go on. Let me see, we have Wayne that also said, if I add new code files to the app code, will they ever be overwritten? If I add new code files to app code, no, they will not, Wayne. That's actually a practice that we normally do in our application, is we create a folder under app code called BLL, like Business Logic Layer or something like that. And under that, we start adding additional folders and namespacing a bunch of classes so that we can organize, if we build our own notification subsystem to send emails and on and on and on. We put all that in a BLL folder, and that's never tampered with or never overwritten. The only things that IronSpeed may overwrite are the files that it generated there, specifically in section 2. Okay, so if you were to just right-click here and go to Page Directives, this is where you can add your own content anywhere in here and manipulate that, as well as at the end of the update panel or what have you. If you want to add more code outside of this even, so like register tags or something like that for a third-party control, you can slap them right in here, no problem. If you need to modify the piece of code outside of this page region even, then that's where you would open up the master page and manipulate the master page. We actually did quite a different UI. Here, let me just show you. So one of our clients is the Walt Disney Company, and we built an app. We built the startings of an app. We kind of kicked off and led the way on a specific app. I just wanted to show you because, yes, this is an IronSpeed application. It may not look like it. Look at this menu. That looks nothing like an IronSpeed menu, right? And they've got these little doodads where text and images switch around. And once you start getting into here, it starts looking a little bit more like an IronSpeed application. And there's a bunch of magic features in there too. But you can see the multiple menus, and the menus shrink up. If I click on the advocate, it pulls up data from records, and on and on. We even added, where is it? We even added this section. So here's JavaScript. So bypassing IronSpeed, what they wanted here was a way to click add, not go to the server, allow them to put in their own URL and their own link here, and save that, and that's just Ajax's, and it threw that right into a table. So it did save that to the database, and we're using IronSpeed code in order to do that, but it sure doesn't look like IronSpeed, does it? So whatever gets created, don't think that that's all you're going to get. You can completely manipulate how things work and change all the aspects of the page. It's just a matter of what are you going to change the master page to look like, to add in these little tiny shadow details and widgets and doodads, and how are you going to change the menu and all that kind of stuff. All it takes is a little bit of time. And of course, there was a lot of labor involved in changing that UI because, as you can see, it was customized greatly. But that's what Disney wanted, so that's what Mickey Mouse got. So hopefully that answered your question, Wayne. Okay, let's see. We also have a question here. If I get a reference or NuGet package from the website project using Visual Studio, will IronSpeed overwrite it? If I add okay, so yeah, I just showed you how to add your register tag to your page using page directives. And look at the videos on IronSpeed's website. They have walkthroughs from other MVPs that show you exactly how to do that. It's great. HD says, when I start IronSpeed, it requires me to be an admin. Is that normal? Yes, because IronSpeed needs access to the web server and IIS, and also all kinds of privileges on the actual system itself. So it is normal for any developer, IronSpeed or not, to require local administrator access to the system that they're working on. Okay, we have a question. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce the name. Yishigeru. It says the slides are not automatically changing in the viewer. Any setting I can do? Okay, I think everyone else saw them, so it must have been on your side. Let me see. For security, Hassan says, for security, does view state really matter to be saved in the database or the page? Okay, so the view state contains a long session ID. It's a unique, crazy, GUID-like session ID, and that is publicly visible and changeable. But the odds of them being able to change that session ID and sending that back to load up somebody else's session is not impossible, but it's really, really, really difficult to do, especially when sessions time out after, what, 20 minutes? So the odds of that are pretty low. So you shouldn't save in view state anything private like, user password, add to the view state the password is ABC. You shouldn't do anything like that because anyone can get a hold of that and figure out what the password is. Instead, it's best to save that on the server side, maybe in a table, encrypt it all the better, and IronSpeed provides ways to encrypt with functions and whatnot for that. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, please re-ask it. Okay, let me see. We have, let me get rid of the whole sound works okay. Okay. Changes says, why do programmers always mix up Halloween and Christmas? Because October 31st equals December 25th, Octal 31 equals decimal 25. That's pretty funny. Hey, that's a great joke, Changes. So October 31 equals December 25th. Hang on, let me see if I can write that. That's got to be written on the screen. Right, so the octal 31 is equal to the decimal of 25. That's awesome. And so Changes, I hope that I can I can use that on future training. That's great. Okay, let me see. One person asked, can we use the Express version of Visual Studio? Although you said don't worry about it, you found your answer online, I wanted to just reiterate that yes, you can use the Express version of Visual Studio, which is free, in order to do your manipulations and stuff. There's a few features missing, but pretty much 90% of everything you need is built right in with the free version, the Express version of Visual Studio. Frank says, is IronSpeed using MVC? Yeah, that's it's kind of using MVC. It gets back to the question of what is MVC, and different people might have different ideas. It's almost like, what is Scrum? Are you following Scrum? Everyone says yes, but. So, there's a few exceptions and things like that, but generally speaking, yeah, it has some aspects of MVC. Okay, let me see. We have Ajax update panels. Since IronSpeed uses them, does that mean we don't need to think about them at all? Greg said. Greg, you're pretty much right. You don't have to worry about Ajax. IronSpeed is going to handle all that for you. However, for advanced users, if you want to change the behavior of Ajax or make it even more complicated or unique, you have the ability and power to do that. So IronSpeed doesn't just take it from you and leave you out in the dark. It handles it for you, and if you want, you can change it. Okay, David says, how do you include those extra files in the master? Okay, so the master page, so you can actually see here that the master page being used is the horizontal menu master. And you can see there are various cells in the cell editor. Okay, so for this, you can actually see that there's the inside this PD, there's an IronSpeed panel, and there's some main panels and whatnot. So this is where you might change or dress up or add your own little images for spacers and other types of. So we modified this a lot for Disney in order to add shadows and other types of things to make the page look the way that they wanted it to look. So yeah, you just change that, and you can just right-click and create a duplicate, and then now you have a whole new master you can change, and you can hook your pages to that new master. It's pretty cool. Okay, Hassan says, customizing PDF reports. What's the best way to add a company logo in these PDF reports? These PDF reports are generated in XML file and have no way to add these customizations. Any ideas? Hassan, that's beyond the scope of this code. That's a great question, but it's beyond the scope of the audience on this call. So what I'll do is I'll direct you over to the videos. If you go to IronSpeed's website and go to the videos, there are people that make videos and show you exactly how to manipulate and change the design of the PDF file. Also, if you look on the forums, those are freely available. You can ask your questions there, and you'll probably get some really good help from somebody who's better than I. Usually when I deal with PDFs, I use the basic IronSpeed PDFs, and if they need too much more than that, I usually make an SSRS report and deploy that and iframe that in or something like that. Okay, Mike says, thank you. You're welcome, Mike. Let me see. Robert says, have to go through Fire Drill now. Will this be available as a download? Yeah, Robert, I think they're going to email that to you in about 4 hours or something like that. So watch your email. If not, email IronSpeed, and they'll give you the slides. And then Hassan says, I'm building a SaaS app, and I have a company ID equals get column user ID, CID, to initialize company field when adding and editing records. If I don't want it for certain tables that are common for all clients, in my application database, where can I disable that initialization for these tables, and how? Okay, Hassan, that goes beyond the scope of this basic training. It'd probably be best if you ask that on a forum, or if you want, you can feel free to engage an MVP. We can sign a contract. You can do that with any MVP, and they would be able to give you professional support and help with the programmers. We have here, we're a staff of 12 people, so we've got people that will be able to look at your specific project and figure out exactly what you're trying to do, and either get that part working or recommend a different way to change that. Okay. All right, well, that's all the questions. I'll stay here for another few seconds. If you have any final questions, slap them in the list, and I'll be happy to answer them. Renee says, thanks a lot, Jim. Well done. Hey, thank you, Renee. Appreciate that. And meanwhile, I'll show my contact information here. You can at least find my website and whatnot if you need to contact me. Clap, clap. Hey, all right. I almost heard the claps, Greg. Thanks for the clapping. Wayne says, thanks so much. You're welcome. Oh, if you have any feedback on things that I can do better or improve upon or kudos or whatever, shoot that over to IronSpeed. They are very interested in knowing how their trainers train, and if there's anything we can do better, I definitely want to hear about it so that I can come up with more jokes or make it a little more lively or explain things more clearly or whatever. So please give us feedback. That's very important for us. Okay, great talk. Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks so much. You're welcome. Let me see. Help with the app. Let's see. How do you come up? Okay, so Hassan is asking, how do you come up with fees for help with the app? Most MVPs charge by the hour. We could do blocks of time or something like that. Each MVP is a little bit different. Each MVP runs their own separate consulting company. So you can go to the MVP list. If you go to ironspeed.com and scroll to the very bottom, it's an MVP list. And you can see the various MVPs and find how each person usually handles that. Okay, somebody said I just joined the meeting. I hope the recorded session will be available. I don't think the session was recorded, so wah wah. Sorry about that. Let me see. Dean says you should post the Disney example. Okay, yeah, good one, Dean. I can't exactly do that. Disney said that I'm not allowed to advertise that I do work for them. That's most of our customers for some reason. So our website doesn't show anything we've done in the last few years because everybody wants us to be quiet about what we're working on. So I can show you little demos like I did here. That's no problem because the tech department, there's nothing secret there. So they said no problem. It's cool, but I can't post their logo on my website or mention their name or use Mickey Mouse and all that kind of stuff because they say all that's trademarked and the legal department freaks out. I know it kind of sucks, but the way it works. Okay, somebody asked, how do you become an MVP? Hey, great question. You can contact IronSpeed for that, email them, and they can walk you through the process of what the qualifications are and help you through that. Dean says hide names and such. Yeah, I guess I could do that. You know, Smart Start is pretty generic, so that's not really Disney, is it? Okay, somebody said, Jim, a general question, could IronSpeed continue to evolve for increasing need of fast application development? Yes. IronSpeed constantly comes out with new versions of their product, and you've probably noticed that there is a certain version, like a 10.1, and then maybe 3 months later or something like that, there might be a 10.2 and then a 10.3. So yeah, there are new versions. So for those of you that are brand new to IronSpeed and are only familiar with the current version, yes, there are new versions that come out fairly regularly. So it's important to have a support contract so you get these new versions. And there are new features that they add and all kinds of cool stuff. We have projects that are in older versions that we haven't migrated. We also have projects that we have migrated, and we have, so we have lots of customers with lots of different versions, and the feature set's slightly different as time goes on. So yeah, if you want the latest features, yeah, you want to keep up with the latest version of IronSpeed. Okay, let me see. Okay, HD is saying having difficulties getting the security wizard to complete. Okay, that's something, HD, that is best handled. Well, there seems to be no more questions, so I'll probably count to 10, and if there's no more questions, I'll go ahead and run through the security wizard on my system for like 10 or 15 minutes, just so you can see how I normally set it up. Maybe that will help you answer your question. But the presentation, what is it, 201, Fundamentals of IronSpeed Designer, or Intermediate, that's what it's called, Intermediate IronSpeed Designer. That covers security in a lot more detail, but I'll give you the same demo right now in a sec. Ben says, nice presentation. Thank you. You're welcome. Okay. All right, well, that's all the questions I have. So let's go ahead. I'll do the security thing for